Hello there. Hi, I'm Felicity. I'm a satisfaction coach, yoga teacher, and reflexologist who is empowering people to live a happier, healthier, and more satisfied life that they don't need to escape from. And how are you doing today? Hello to anyone who's watching live. And hello to anyone who's watching on replay. You are all very welcome as well. And please bob some comments in if there's anything that I talk about that you find interesting or you want to feed back on. I'm really interested to hear all your comments because a lot of what I talk about is very much it's kind of my own philosophies and things like that. I like to think that they're philosophies that come from an educated standpoint. It's knowledge that I've gained from here, there, and everywhere. I'm really interested in neuroscience. I'm really interested in psychology. My experience in yoga also, and I'm not just interested in the yoga posture practice, but I'm interested in yoga philosophy, and that brings a certain amount of knowledge to me as well. So, this is all stuff that's bubbling in my head all the time, and I'm always interested in your feedback because that helps me formulate and mold my philosophies and what I talk about and what I teach as well. So I wrote a blog this week. More often than not, for those who haven't watched before, these lives are kind of a chance for me to talk about the blog that I've written this week. And it's a chance for, if you haven't read the blog at all, you can, it gives you a chance to feedback or ask questions on what I've written. If you haven't, and maybe, some people aren't so interested in reading or reading text doesn't hold their attention. So I like to come on here and discuss it and present it to you. And I normally talk about things slightly differently when I talk about them rather than write about them. So if you're there, say hello. Make sure you give Restream permission, because then if you give Restream your permission, I can see who's said stuff. But I'd love to know if you're there. So this week, my blog was all about prioritizing pleasure and a different aspect on the idea of prioritizing pleasure. So I'd love to know, what does prioritizing pleasure mean to you? And this came from a few conversations that I've had over the last few weeks about being in that space where, especially as you're getting a little bit older, as some of us are, and you want to make the most of your life, you're kind of like feeling like life is ticking by. Trust me, if you're younger, life speeds up as you get older, and you see the years and the seasons and flashing by you, and you suddenly think, I've got lots of things I want to do, or I want to have lots of fun with this time that I have. And quite often our concept of fun or a concept of pleasure, especially in the modern world, is quite hedonistic. It's quite short-term pleasure. Actually, all pleasure is short-term. I'll come on to that a little bit more later. But we've kind of created this world, our modern world, and even not necessarily that modern, even if you go back to the debauchery of Roman times, we've kind of created this idea that pleasure is kind of top end ecstasy, that we always have to strive for higher highs. It's kind of a capitalist dream, really. Again, I'll come on to that again later as well, probably. But it's a way of escaping our everyday life. And this is what I mean when I talk about living a satisfied life you don't need to escape from. Where I'm trying to get to in my life is that I never feel like anything that I do is an escape from something else. That I never feel like I'm trying to get away from anything. So I like having fun. I like going out. I like having holidays. But I never feel like when I go on holiday nowadays that I'm getting away from it all. I feel like I'm going to something. Even if it's going to doing nothing, going to relaxation, that's all right. But I don't feel like I have to go to relaxation because I have to get away from my everyday life. I've had quite a few holidays lately. And actually, I was getting to the point where I really needed to get back home, get back into my routines, get back to the everyday. Because that's actually, to me, that's quite comforting. My routines are comforting. And it means I can do more of this business and more of this talking to you guys and more of my writing. So I've been taking a lot of my own advice on getting good routines and planning plans in place lately. But we have this weird thing that a lot of our short-term pleasures are actually really bad for us in the long term, aren't they? So a lot of what we consider to be kind of a pleasure in our life or enjoyable in our life, a lot of them are pretty bad for our bodies, aren't they? Think about things like getting drunk or overeating, anything that we consider as an excess, especially. Excess by its very nature is going to put strain on something. It's going to put strain on our bodies. And this is where this dichotomy almost comes in between, do I want to just have fun or do I want to live longer and healthier? Now I think that there's got to be a middle ground there. There has to be a middle ground. You can, but it's very, very hard to starve yourself of all pleasure. And in fact, scientists find that people who cannot experience pleasure, it's an effect called anhedonia, find it really hard to be happy. It has a massive impact on their well-being. But there can be things that happen in the brain, which means that you don't experience pleasure. So pleasure is quite important from that point of view. But can we balance it with still wanting to take care of it, especially of our bodies, but also of our minds? A lot of our excesses are bad for our minds as well. Might be bad for our finances as well. Things like excesses of gambling or escapes. Thinking about them as these are all escapes. These are all ways that we try and mentally check out from our everyday and check out from thinking. Whether it's television, gambling, shopping, eating, drinking. These are all ways that we try and escape. And actually, this is not pleasure. There's a lot of stuff. So I'm quite into a fella called Epicurus. He was a Greek philosopher. And he was quite influential on a Roman poet called Horace. And you'll know Horace because Horace is the person who wrote Carpe Diem. And the full line, which was in one of his odes, is Carpe Diem, I've got this written down, Carpe Diem quam minimum credula postero. I'm sure my Latin pronunciation is not brilliant. And Carpe Diem's been skewed. It doesn't necessarily mean seize the day as in just do what you want whenever you want to. It's kind of better interpreted as pluck the day, trusting as little as possible in the future. Now, that doesn't mean that forgetting about the future. That means saying, I can't guarantee that the future is going to be very good. Therefore, I'm going to take steps today to make the future better. And the Epicureans had this same philosophy, this idea that if we're prioritizing our pleasure, we should be prioritizing our pleasure for a long term, not for a short term. So, for example, getting drunk. I like a drink, all right? And so I'm not demonizing people who drink. But getting drunk is not prioritizing your pleasure in any way, shape, or form. Anyone who's had a hangover will know that getting drunk is not prioritizing pleasure. Having that pleasure that pleasurable sensation of being drunk for 2 or 3 hours, however long you tend to go out drinking, does not balance out a day of a hangover the next day. Or even if it's not a full-on hangover, but the fact that, you might be low on energy, you kind of end up writing off the day a bit, don't you, the next day after a heavy drinking session. That's not prioritizing pleasure, especially not as you get older and the hangovers get worse and they get longer. I can't be doing with it anymore. Spending money. So this is where, Carpe Diem's really kind of got twisted out of shape. We might say, oh, I'm just going to buy this thing because seize the day, I'm just going to buy it. And then you shove the purchase on the credit card or whatever. This is not seizing the day and trusting little to the future. This is just storing up grief. And it's definitely not prioritizing pleasure. Because what pleasure is there in having to pay a debt off for months, maybe years, all for the very, very short-lived joy of a purchase? So what is pleasure if it isn't these escapes? So the Epicureans Epicurus himself had a thought on this as well. And he said that there are 2 types of pleasure, or there's 2 ways that we get pleasure. One is ataraxia, which is a state of calmness, a state of neutrality. It's not about being up here. It's about finding a neutral state. And the other is aponia, which is kind of relief from mental or physical pain. And we'll have all experienced this, right? We all experience that relief, when you get into a warm bath when you're feeling cold, or when you're feeling really hot, as we're probably a lot of us in the UK will be now. And, like when you're baking yourself on the beach and you get a nice cool breeze, that sense of relief, that's pleasure. Pleasure is a kind of thing, it's our body telling us that we've come to a homeostasis, that we've come to a nice neutral place, not that we're hitting a hedonic high. And Michel Cabernac has this idea that maybe we go for those hedonic highs now because we don't need for as much stuff anymore. We have most of our basic needs met most of the time. And they're fairly quick fixes, if not, for most of us. Again, I do need to caveat this because, a few years ago in the West, you wouldn't even think twice about saying, if you're a bit cold, you quickly and easily find ways of heating yourself up. We all know that this winter that's not going to be quite so much the case. So yes, this is possibly not going to be quite, or this is going to have a different flavour to it over the coming months. But as a general human population, especially in the West, we have our basic human needs met pretty easily most of the time. We don't have to spend hours foraging for food in order to fill our aching bellies and then feel that real pleasure of food. So this is why we seek for, we've had to find other ways that eating food gives us pleasure, because it's not necessarily to stop us from feeling hungry anymore. It's for the taste of it. It's for the social aspect of it. It might be for the competitiveness of it, how much you can eat. So maybe this is one reason why we've lost touch with what pleasure really is. But also this whole avoiding thinking almost. So I'm back in reading the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who basically spent his life on the concept of flow. And flow is being in that state where everything just goes perfectly. When you're doing something, you're so absorbed in a task that even you don't exist. You might just feel like the task is flowing through you, that you're just an avatar for it, and time doesn't exist. And the chapter that I'm reading at the moment is very pertinent to this. He's talking about how a lot of what we think are our pleasures are actually just distractions. And true pleasure, the optimum human experience of enjoyment, involves a little bit of challenge. But we've kind of shirked away from challenge nowadays, don't we? We think that anything that is challenging should be hard and it should be stressful. But actually, challenge is really good for us. Not just in terms of where it can lead us to, but in that actual moment of experience. It needs a bit of challenge in order to get that optimum human experience. I feel like I could waffle about this a lot more, and I feel like I'm not going to waffle about it anymore. Because I could talk about this sort of thing for ages, and this is the sort of thing that I do talk about on the Satisfaction Revolution, which will be reopening at the end of August. So I'm going to stop waffling for now. I hope some of that's kind of interesting. And like I say, I'm really interested to hear other people's point of view. I mean, even if you bob me a comment telling me I'm talking a load of rubbish. Tell me if I'm talking a load of rubbish. But also tell me if you also feel that kind of that point. And again, maybe it's a midlife crisis thing. Maybe there's a midlife thing where you're suddenly thinking, well, time is getting short and I want to enjoy this time that I have on Earth. But I also want to elongate that time for as long as possible. And I don't want to feel pain in my body or in my mind either. So sometimes quite a number of those escapes might cause us mental trauma. So something like gambling, for example, in particular, if gambling leads to debt, this is going to cause us mental pain. Just for that very, very short-lived hedonistic pleasure. So can you rethink pleasure a little bit? And this, I'm talking quite a lot this month about savouring our moment and savouring the moments that we actually have. And if I wanted to get political about it, which I'm not going to too much because I'm nearly up to 20 minutes, I could say that trying to find pleasures that don't involve spending some money is one really good way of sticking it to the man. And it might be something that we really, really need to adapt to. Even those of us, though obviously not those who are really, really going to struggle over the next few months, people who are really struggling now. But we're all going to have to tighten our belts a little bit. And maybe some of those pleasures that we would normally spend a huge amount of money on might be things that we have to roll back on a little bit. But there are other pleasures. And pleasure comes from a little bit of challenge. So learning something new. It's that point at which the challenge perfectly meets your skills, that's where you find your point of flow. If something's not challenging enough, then it gets a bit boring. If something's too challenging, it's just frustrating, right? So tell me what you think about that. And share this around if any of it's been interesting to you. I'm going to chop a little bit out and make it into a short one. And if you want to also, this might not be relevant to many people because I know there'll be a lot of people going off on your holidays over the next few weeks. But maybe when you come back from your holidays and you're thinking, I need to get back into some good routines, get back into some good habits, check out my freebie. I think the link's in the stuff somewhere. I've got a free training on how to be a routine queen or king. And it's all about planning your perfect routine. So those little routines that you do every day, whether it's your routine getting up in the morning or going to bed in the evening in particular. So I've been going back over this again and it's given me a proper good kick up the backside, I tell you. And it feels good to get back in good routines. I'm really, really enjoying it. So I shall leave you with that. Give me a like, give me a comment, or give me an angry face if you want. If you don't like what I'm saying, give me an angry face, all right? I can take it. And should be back next Wednesday. I might do some yoga next week. I think I might have said that a couple of weeks ago. I might do some yoga next week. So if you're interested in me doing some yoga, tell me what you might want me to do in terms of yoga. What would you like me to break down? Or what part of the body are you interested in? Otherwise, have a wonderful week. And I'll see you again soon. Cheerio.